Okay, we're back, and we're in the final chapter of middle childhood, discussing psychosocial development between 6 and puberty. Okay, for a lot of kids who are in this age group, there are siblings present. Not everybody, but for a lot of kids, there are siblings. Let's talk a little bit about only children versus people who have siblings. Right now in the US, about 30% of families have only one child and will only ever have one child in their family. So it's a growing number. When I first started teaching this class back in the dark ages of the 1990s, it was 10% of American families that had only one child. So that rate has tripled in the past 25 years. So it's probably going to become more and more common to have families with only one child. And so we've been studying that. And, in China, there was a law where you could only have one child. And so that was a great place to go and study the effects of having only one child and what it does for the psychosocial development of a child. It turns out in the US, it's much more common for families that live in urban settings to have only one child. Expenses are higher and things like that, whereas in more suburban or rural settings, it's more affordable and more tenable to have multiple children. What we've found from research is if we compare only children to firstborn children, who are then going to go on to have siblings, they find that there are some superior outcomes of being an only child. Only children tend to have higher educational achievement, more likely to go on to college, things like that. They tend to have higher intelligence scores, and they tend to be higher in conscientiousness, which is a personality trait where the child is orderly, can track their own schedules, are on time, things like that. So there are a number of superior outcomes that are associated with being an only child. There are also some negative or equal outcomes. In the equal outcomes, there's really no difference between an only child and psychological adjustment. That's something that we psychologists have been concerned about, that maybe there's something fundamental about having the dynamic between siblings that would help a person to be psychologically well-adjusted, confident, not neurotic. A neurotic person is somebody who has lots of anxieties and self-doubt, things like that. It turns out there's no difference between an only child and a firstborn child. And then there's no difference in sociability. So it's not the case that an only child is going to become shy and not want to be around other people, things like that. It's just they have to seek out friends rather than just having these automatic peers that are their siblings to play with. So only children tend to look fairly similar to firstborns and in some ways a little bit better outcomes. Now you'll notice we're only comparing to firstborns. It turns out that, all of us, I'm a secondborn, all of us seconds and further down the line children, we oftentimes have sort of a dilution of parental investment. There are more children around, parents don't have as much energy and stuff like that. So being a second, third, fourth, or like my husband, eighth child means that by the time it comes along to you, there may be less parental investment. Now in my husband's case, he got a lot of older sibling investment because his oldest sibling was 14 when he was born. So these older children oftentimes take on a pseudo-parental role rather than the role of a peer. And so there's, being a later child, there seems to be, maybe more negative outcomes than you get from being an only child. So let's talk a little bit about siblings. It turns out, a lot of us, we remember probably some negative interactions with our siblings, right? We remember fighting or competing or whatever. I have a friend who has two children who are within 3 years of each other's age. They're the same sex, and it seems like they are vying for their parents' attention a lot. You know what I mean? And so that's what attracts our attention, that it seems like they're competing. But it turns out the vast majority of siblings' interactions are not based on sibling rivalry. It's more like what we're seeing here, where the little one's on the tractor and the big one's giving him a push. Right? That's much more common. Like most of the children's day is spent being supportive or neutral to each other, and there's the occasional flare-ups of rivalry. It turns out that older siblings initiate most interactions. I'm not just saying this because I'm a second born, but whether they are positive interactions or negative interactions, generally the older sibling is the ringleader, the one who comes up with the pro-social idea of sitting down and reading a book together, and the anti-social idea of pulling their sibling's hair or something. It tends to be the older child who comes up with that stuff. Younger siblings are more likely to imitate, which is one of the things that annoys older siblings. The imitation is no fun, but it's actually the sincerest form of flattery, right? But younger siblings tend to be influenced by the older siblings' behaviors more than the older sibling is influenced by the younger. Same-sex siblings tend to be closer to each other, and it may be because they just sort of more inherently share interests, or it could be because they tend to get lumped together, the girls, the boys, rather than, having this sort of individuality that comes from not being the same sex and parents, refer to you differently and treat you differently. So it's not really clear why, but same-sex siblings do tend to be a little closer. Maternal employment is another big issue during this stage of life. A lot of moms who stayed home during the early period of, infancy and maybe even into early childhood take the opportunity for their, once their youngest child is into school full time, to return to work. Some moms, of course, worked all the way from the very beginning, but it's a much more common pattern by middle childhood to have, more than half of moms back in the workforce. And so researchers have been interested in it. Let's all just take a moment to acknowledge that no research has gone into the effect of dad being employed. You go Google it, because that'll get you to some weird stuff. But go into the school library online and search for paternal employment and child adjustment, and you're going to find a bunch of articles on unemployed dads. You're not going to find a bunch of articles about the stress of dad going back to work. So it's very, let's just take a moment to enjoy that. But back to our research. What they found with regard to moms having jobs outside the home. I also, aside again, because moms who are at home work really hard. So I'm just saying moms who work outside the home and somebody gives them a paycheck rather than just sort of taking for granted what they do. I didn't stay home full time with my children. My husband did. And as a woman, I was very much trying to make sure he always felt appreciated, because it's stuff that's done in the home gets taken for granted all the time. So I'm talking about moms who leave the house and get a paycheck. So what are some of the benefits of having a mom who works? One benefit is that children whose moms work oftentimes are given more responsibilities at home. They may have chores, they may have specific things that they do every afternoon when they get home. For example, they might have to make their own after-school snack, or feed the animals, or things like that. The dog and the cat, whatever. Take them for a walk. They have more responsibilities, and it turns out that that's good for kids. Kids do well when they have not. These two kids in this picture are too young to be being sent out to the factory. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about having things that they have ownership over and that the family needs done gives them a sense of pride. And so having responsibilities at home can make the child feel more competent and more useful and more needed. Daughters whose moms work tend to, as they age, have higher achievement goals. Their self-esteem tends to be higher. And it might be in part because they have a stronger belief in women's competence. So they're more likely to internalize messages that they can be anything or do anything, and that women are as competent as men, and those kinds of things. So daughters benefit in that way. Whoops, I went the wrong way. Here we go. Sons tend to have better adjustment when their moms work than when their moms are home full time, maybe in part because they have more responsibilities and develop their own personal competence because of that. They also, just like girls, daughters tend to benefit from seeing their moms going to work, because that really fosters in them a general sense that women are as competent as men, and can be breadwinners and things like that. And then because their dads oftentimes are picking up more of the slack, giving baths, making dinner, things like that, they have an opportunity to see men behaving in warm ways, and recognizing that men have feelings and those kinds of things are beneficial, especially to sons. Some of the downsides, well, one of these downsides is exactly the same as one of the upsides. children have more responsibilities at home. Sometimes parents who work sort of treat their young children, their middle childhood children, as like small adults, and they have them knowing and doing things that probably they should be a little bit more protected from. They shouldn't necessarily know about how much it costs to pay the electricity and things like that. But this might be more than these children should be doing. Or they might be being left alone too much, and so then they're responsible for the care of their younger sibling, or things like that that are just a little bit beyond their skill set. So more responsibilities at home when they are the proper level for their development can be a benefit. More responsibilities at home can actually be a burden. And of course, there's the obvious, less time with their parents. Children in middle childhood are starting to move into that age where you might not even have to have them in daycare or with a babysitter after school. They might be able to come home to an empty house, and they're trustworthy enough to not burn the house down and things like that. And so parents think, awesome, they can take care of themselves, and that means they're spending more time alone. They may feel a little isolated because of that. Even if they are in some kind of protected childcare situation, they aren't having the influence of their own parents, and it may be more difficult for them to internalize the morals and things that we talked about in the last chapter. So there's downsides on that side. If you have children who are coming home to an empty house and are caring for themselves, that is associated with kids getting into some mischief, right? And so earlier onset of sexual activity. And when we're talking about middle childhood, hopefully those earlier onsets would be at least after puberty, but maybe not. I mean, sometimes there are involuntary sexual activity that they're engaging in or being victimized by. I mean, there's a lot of things that can happen. And of course, if you have an older sibling who you're trusting to take care of the younger sibling, they might be actually introducing the younger sibling to substance use and other kinds of things that they're learning from their peers and bringing into the household because they have an empty house. So, I mean, these are obvious things that you guys probably already know about that maybe you've experienced or witnessed some of the downsides. So, I mean, it has to be with a good balance that kids are encouraged to grow and develop from mom being out of the house, but also protected from some of the negatives. Speaking of peers, we start to expand out our playmates and friends as we age. So, we talked in early childhood about sort of like whoever's around, that becomes our friend. Well, it's not a ton more expansive now. Just like in early childhood, one of the ways that you get to be around people is by sharing common activities. So here I have some girls who are at camp, right? Common activities, we find friends. And so that's one way to be around other people. By being around other people, we might start to develop affection for other people and start to feel friendly feelings towards them. And of course, so that's going to drive us towards the people who we feel affection for and away from the people who we don't. People who provide us with some support. So we have a couple of boys at like GameStop, and each is taking a turn being the chair. The other one gets to play. That's a friend. Those might be brothers, but I mean, you know what I mean? That's a friend that's physical support. For Pink Woody, it's still going to be that the kids who we are in class with all day at school or who live in our neighborhood are going to be the ones who are most likely to become our friends. Now, you'll notice if you look across all these slides, there's, again, a heavy emphasis on physical characteristics, being the same sex, being the same age. Oftentimes, if you have, even in a diverse situation where people of different races are together, kids will oftentimes seek out people who look like them. And so that's an issue that affects our peer choice throughout life, these kinds of physical characteristics. So just threw that in as a separate box, but it kind of is being illustrated by all the pictures. You can kind of tell. So what do peers do for us? Well, research has been done on kids who are considered popular among their peers. That is, people seek them out. They seem to have a lot of friends and things like that, versus kids who are unpopular. That is oftentimes ignored or actively dissuaded from being with the group. Popular kids behave differently with peers than unpopular kids do. Popular kids, for one thing, talk more. And I don't mean endless talking. It's just they have like questions they can ask the other person, or they have things that they're interested in that they can tell the other person about to try and elicit from the other person a response, things like that. They take turns directing while playing a game or doing a task, and then they follow sometimes when playing a game or taking a task. So popular kids are comfortable in both of those positions. They tend to smile more. Kids who smile are they attract other people to them with that open demeanor that seems friendly. They're more likely to offer help. They're more likely to offer a turn with the toy without having to be asked. They're more likely to offer that to a peer. With unpopular kids, they are more likely to fight with their peers. It could be verbal fighting, it could be physical fighting with their peers. When everybody else is playing and engaged in a game, an unpopular kid might stand on the sidelines hoping that the other kids are going to notice them and invite them in, unaware that most kids are kind of oblivious to the fact that somebody might be standing on the sides wanting to play. Kids are, pretty self-centered, and so they might think, well, that's just our audience. They don't realize that kid might want to play. And so the unpopular kid might stand there hoping to be invited in, and then when they're not invited in, they take it as a personal affront rather than what it is, which is just, kids not realizing. Now, let's say that they decide to initiate. They go up and they say, hi, or can I sit with you, or can I play, things like that. Their overtures like that are more likely to be rejected if they choose a disruptive strategy. So, for example, an unpopular child who's trying to get to play the game might do something like grab the ball and sort of run away with it, or try and engage the players in a way that disrupts the game that the kids are playing. They might be more aggressive. As a girl, I would say that taking the ball is kind of an aggressive act, but that's not objectively an aggressive act. They may do something more like, if they want to sit with you at lunch, they might sort of come stand next to the kid who they want to sit next to and like shove that kid a little bit over on the little bench seat to take their spot on the bench seat, thinking, well, I'm going to come sit with you. Rather than saying, hey, can I sit by you? And then taking a spot that's available, they might sort of just like, hey, move over and kind of give them a shove, right? And that's a little aggressive. So their overtures are more likely to be rejected when they're disruptive or aggressive. They're more likely to be ignored if they're shy. Shy kids oftentimes don't know how to just sort of get over that little bit of a bridge to say, I'd like to play too. And so they're just hoping that somebody will notice and initiate. And oftentimes they end up getting ignored. If they're withdrawn, if they're sort of like, I need you to pull me out. I need you, I need you to realize that my feelings are hurt right now, and so I'm going to be over my little hole, and you need to pull me out. A lot of times kids will ignore that because they don't know what it means, or maybe they don't want to play that game, whatever. So we see different kinds of behaviors from popular and unpopular kids when interacting with their peers. We see different behaviors from popular and unpopular kids when they are having to cope with anger. All of us get angry sometimes, and there are different ways of coping with it. Popular kids tend to cope better, at least I can say in ways that adults approve of more. I can say that. When popular kids get angry, a lot of times they are very direct about what has angered them. You took the ball, we were in the middle of our game, give us the ball back, right? That kind of thing, like much more direct. And just dealing with the problem. And that kind of directness, give us the ball back, that's not fair, we were playing, that minimizes conflicts. It's hard to argue against, you did X, now you need to do Y. It's a lot harder to argue with. Reduces conflicts. It helps to maintain relationships. A popular child is less likely to say, because you're so stupid and, nobody likes you anyway. Those kinds of things are less likely to come out of a child who is sought out by his peers. And that's why people seek them out, because they treat people well. Among popular boys, they do express their anger, but one of the things about kids who are popular and not bullying is that even if their peer is trying to bait them, they will resist it. They won't, lash out. So popular boys tend to have more control over their reactions to anger than unpopular boys do. Girls, when they get angry, oftentimes will express their disapproval, and a lot of times it'll be through facial expressions, body posture, or language. They won't express their disapproval through physical ways or something like that. So girls are more likely to say, that's not fair, or to turn their back on the child who's offending them, or whatever. And boys are more likely to take the more direct route in general. Unpopular kids are much more likely when they're angry to lash out and hit. They're more likely to go tattle. They feel like they've been wronged. Rather than dealing with the direct, say, give the ball back, they'll run over and tell the teacher, Johnny took the ball, make him give it back. They're more likely to take the ball. Unpopular kids, when they're angry, are more often to literally take their ball and go home, right? They'll take the other kids' toys as a retaliation. They're more likely to be bullies. They're more likely to act out in a bullying fashion. Now, what role do our family units play on whether we behave in a way that attracts other people to us? Well, one of the things that has been observed is that children are much more pro-social when they're with their peers than they are with their siblings. So sometimes we act out our most negative selves when we're at home, and then we are able to be our better, more popular selves, the kind of person who could attract friends when we're with our peers. So sometimes siblings take the raw end of the deal there. If we have a sibling who dominates us at home, it is oftentimes associated with compensation when we get around our peers. And so you can see bullying behavior coming from kids who get dominated at home. So if you have a pair of siblings who one of them is clearly dominating the other, it may be fostering a future bully among their peers. Parents of kids who are sought out by their peers tend to have warm, positive relationships with their children. So a warm, positive relationship with parents is associated with a warm, positive relationship with your peers as well. So it sets you up for sort of that general secure attachment. Parents of popular children are more likely to adopt an authoritative parenting style where they listen to their kids, but they have rules so that there's a negotiation and some explanation that's age appropriate as kids grow, so that kids don't feel like random stuff just happens, but instead they understand the principles. Parents of kids who are sought out by their peers deliberately teach cooperation, deliberately teach their kids to take turns and to play their part and to assert themselves. If you don't like what's going on, you have to speak up. Not lash out, but speak up. Parents of unpopular children, among the mothers, oftentimes there's an association between children who have difficulty making friends at school and then mothers who are not that confident in their parenting style. So mothers who are always questioning or are maybe inconsistent in their parenting style are more likely to foster children who have difficulty making friends. Moms who kind of encourage clinginess and discourage independence are more likely to have kids who have difficulty making friends, doing the kinds of things that kids do with their peers, going in and spending time at their friend's house or playing a game after school or something like that. They don't want their kids to have the kind of independence, and so that interferes with the kids' ability to actually make friends. Fathers of unpopular children oftentimes are sort of negligent fathers, ones who don't really pay that much attention to their kids. They oftentimes see their role as breadwinner and not as an emotional trainer or any of those kinds of things. So they oftentimes, if you ask them, they'll say, well, that's women's work. My job is to make money and her job is to raise the kids. And so that kind of standoffishness may foster insecurity in their kids, lack of confidence in their kids, other kinds of things that make it hard for those kids to reach out and make friends with their peers. All right, aggression. Now, when we think about aggression, I think we usually think about hostile aggression and relational aggression. And that's appropriate because instrumental aggression is the kind of aggression that we use to achieve a goal. Right? So these two kids are fighting over the doll and they each want the doll. They're not trying to hurt each other. They just both want the doll. And this kind of aggression is really common in early childhood, especially among kids who really don't know yet that the other person has feelings. So if the other child ends up getting hurt, it's completely by accident. The child is just using instrumental aggression. By middle childhood, we're starting to get concerned about expressions of hostile aggression. So we have the little girl pulling the other little girl's hair. Or relational aggression starts to emerge in middle childhood and really, really strongly into adolescence. And that's the kind where we ostracize, tease, isolate, things like that. I purposely picked all girls because I think we typically think about boys and aggression. And while it's true that boys are more likely to behave in hostile aggression ways, girls are much more likely to use relational aggression. Both sexes equally use instrumental aggression. So let's talk a little bit about what causes us to behave in aggressive ways. So some new research on genes has shown a relationship between the MAOA type L genotype and then reactive aggression, which is where you feel like the other person has done something and you are reacting in a hostile, aggressive way. You feel justified in it because you feel like they did something first, right? So you're just reacting. And also, it's been associated with impulsive violence, the more just out of nowhere hostility that a person might feel and act on. So MAOA has been associated with the two types that we're the most concerned about, really, because it can be the most damaging, where a person lashes out, hits, or pulls hair, or whatever. There are also brain-related factors, and they're still tied to this gene. It's possible that this gene governs the aggressive behavior through the action of certain brain structures. So people who have a hyper-reactive amygdala, the amygdala is the part of the brain that governs fear and aggression. In one area, when the amygdala is firing rapidly, it makes you feel fearful. In the other part of the amygdala, when it's firing rapidly, it makes you feel angry. So one hypothesis is that this MAOA-L gene makes the amygdala hyperreactive. So just the smallest insult can be enough to activate that anger section of the amygdala. The other part that's important is what's called hyporeactive prefrontal regulatory functions. Hyporeactive means that it's underreactive. Your frontal lobe, if you recall, the prefrontal cortex is in charge of inhibitions, making plans and following through, those kinds of things. So if you have a hyporeactive prefrontal cortex, it may be slow to dampen your feelings of anger, and then you end up acting out on those feelings of anger before your prefrontal cortex can come in and go, wait, I don't think we're supposed to do this. This doesn't seem right. And so you may get the reactive aggression and the impulsive violence before the frontal lobe can really come up with any good logical reasons not to act like that. So it's possible that this gene sets up these structures in the brain to function in a particular way, or it could be working a whole other way. This is just the way. This is one theory about how it works. So genes, neural factors, also biochemistry. A lot of effort has gone into studying testosterone. Here we have mice, which are, I will acknowledge, not human. So their data can be, there's other stuff that goes into human behavior besides just hormones. But what we see here is in the orange part on the left, the male mice who have their testicles, so they haven't been castrated yet, and you see the number of biting attacks. Man, they spend a lot of time biting. Then during the blue phase, they've castrated the mouse, so it no longer has the testosterone coming from the testicles anymore. You see that the biting attacks have gone almost to the floor, like practically no biting attacks. Then they start adding in testosterone, and you see in the red phase where the biting attacks start to resume. So this kind of evidence from mice gives the impression that testosterone might cause aggression, right? But like I said, humans have a lot of other things that intervene between hormones and behavior than mice do. I mean, these mice were in a cage with nothing else to do but attack their cage mate. Humans have all sorts of internalized morals, other kinds of things that can impact whether they actually act on their impulses. Now, this hopefully does not apply to middle childhood kids, but I threw in the other issue on biochemistry, which is the role of alcohol. A lot of times we want to blame hormones because we see males getting into bar fights, when maybe the important thing is the fact that they had too much alcohol in their blood and it lowered their inhibitions and they did stuff they wouldn't normally do. So we have to be really super careful about inferring too much about testosterone. In humans, the few men who have been castrated as a punishment for acting badly in modern times, their bad behavior does not go down like it does in those biting mice. There are so many other factors that determine aggressiveness. Let's talk about some of those other factors. Aversive conditions. Here I have a picture of a sweaty kid trying to study in an 80-degree room. If it's too hot, if it doesn't smell, if the roof's being tarred, or your classroom is right next to the dumpster and so you can smell like the rotting food in it, or any kind of aversive condition that it makes it painful, smelly, hot, anything like that can make it more likely that anybody is going to lash out either verbally or physically. Reinforcement. You see that the 3 kids are all picking on the one kid. Those 3 kids are reinforcing each other. They feel like a tighter unit. They are feeling superior to the kid who now feels bad. These kinds of feedbacks make it more likely that those kids are going to behave badly in the future because they're getting reinforced for the behavior that they're doing right now. Aggressive models. If you remember the Bobo doll experiment that Bandura did, right? Seeing aggressive models makes it more likely that we'll imitate those behaviors. So, having violence in your neighborhood, or watching a lot of violent TV, or playing violent video games, things like that might lead some people to behave more aggressively. Social scripts. If you have this sort of belief system that, I'll use A Christmas Story, if you guys have seen that movie, where he says, I dare you. I double dare you. I double dog dare you, right? The social script says that you get to a certain point and you better do what you were dared to do, or there's something else has to happen, right? Those social scripts pertain to aggression also. That maybe if a person insults you well enough, you have got to react. Or if a person looks at you, what's that new phrase everybody's using? Out of side eyes, right? If somebody gives you side eyes, now you have to react. If everybody's making fun of you, you either have to react or you turn out to be somebody who now everybody gets to pick on all the time. Those kinds of social scripts can cause people to react because they think they have to, or else something else is going to happen. And then probably all of us can relate to frustration as something that might make us behave aggressively. When you're late to work and there's nothing you can do about it, you're stuck in traffic, sometimes you hit the steering wheel, right? That's an aggressive act. Punch the steering wheel. Sometimes people do that to each other. They get frustrated and they lash out. And children are more likely to do that. And it's really, so all of these things can elicit aggression, and, it can manifest itself in physical stuff. It can manifest itself in verbal stuff. It's sort of the job of the adults in the situation to help kids to channel their reaction to the aversive condition, or the fact that they've been exposed to aggressive models or whatever, into more positive outcomes. Like, I'll confess, my son has gotten to play video games since he was a kid, and my husband would buy him video games that I would not have let him play from when he was in middle childhood. And I didn't think that they were appropriate, but one of the things that we did was we always made sure that we talked to him about what was happening in these videos, and what does it mean, and is this appropriate behavior in real life, and things like that. So adults can have a big impact on whether these circumstances can lead to those negative outcomes. So I have a little video that I embedded in here that shows you the Bobo doll experiment, and it's a really good video. So when you're in the Canvas classroom, make sure you check out the Bobo doll experiment, because those models can really be powerful for causing us to behave in ways that we wouldn't have done otherwise. Now, here we have the imitation idea that was extended out of Bandura's findings, that the children who watched the adult beating up Bobo behaved in ways that they only got from having watched the adult interact with Bobo. Here's one study where they asked kids when they were 8, what kind of TV do they like to watch? And they categorized the kids into ones who were low in their preference for violent TV, medium, or high. Then they followed these kids for the next 20 years, checked back in with them by the time they were age 30. And oh, by the way, they were all male. I forgot to mention that part. Checked back with them when they were the age 30, and they found that the men who who, when they were 8, reported the most interest in violent TV were the ones who were most likely to have been involved in some kind of serious criminal act that involved violence. So some people have argued, well, watching this stuff sort of makes it so that you'll be more likely to imitate the behaviors that you've seen and thus get in trouble. So imitation, TV. I'd like to point out, though, the data that I just reported to you in this graph is not causal data. The Bandura study is. He set up an experiment. He gave the children different videos to watch of adults interacting with Bobo in different ways. And the kids who saw the adults behaving in aggressive ways actually physically mimicked exactly the postures the adults had done. That's not really what we're seeing here in this graph that I'm showing you. This is correlational data. And so there are a lot of other possible interpretations. Remember that third variable and directionality issue. It's possible that the kids who watched the most violent TV or preferred the most violent TV when they were 8 also already were the most violent kids. Or, they had maybe had a predisposition towards violence, and that made them also like to see violence on TV. You don't know. You have no idea. You have no idea if there's something intervening that happened between when they were 8, watching whatever they watched, and then behaving violently at 30. You have no idea. And so all we can say is that it goes together. Let's talk about something more positive, altruism, doing nice things. It's a type of pro-social behavior where we do things for someone else without necessarily getting a reward for ourselves. We start to see altruism in infancy as early as 18 months. You see babies who are willing to help pick something off the floor for somebody who dropped it and things like that. They hug each other as if to console and things like that. So very early on, children show evidence of altruistic or pro-social behaviors. The thing is, I mentioned 18 months because it really requires a certain level of empathy. First, you have to have a sense of self, that I am a separate person from the rest of my environment. And then really to be truly empathetic, you have to have a theory of mind. You have to be able to put yourself in another person's position. And so in middle childhood is when most kids are well equipped to really actually think, what would I feel like if that happened to me? And so let's donate some food because I can't imagine what it would be like not to have enough to eat, right? Things like that. So we really need empathy. And that empathy now recently, research has suggested might come from neural networks in our brain that are allowing us to actually put ourselves in the person's perspective because our brain is firing as though we were in that situation ourselves. We call them mirror neurons because our brain mirrors the activity that the other person's brain is experiencing. It's not a complete overlap. The other person will have the actual, more parts of their brain invoked in the actual experience. So if you have, let's say, a person who has gotten a paper cut, and we put them in an MRI and then give them a paper cut. This sounds like a fun experiment. So give them a paper cut while they're in the MRI. We'll see the parts of their brain that are involved in collecting that touch sensation of pain. We'll see that part activate, and then we'll see their other parts of their brain integrating. What does that mean? What should I do? Thoughts like that. Now, if we show a videotape of a person getting their finger paper cut to a person who's in an MRI, we will see not the sensation parts light up, but all that other integrative stuff where they're making sense of what happened and imagining what it feels like. Those mirror neurons allow us to put ourselves in somebody else's place and show the kind of empathy that allows us to, behave in nice ways and be supportive of other people. And those mirror neurons develop across our middle childhood and into adolescence. Now, some of the stuff that goes along with altruism is more advanced reasoning skills, and it may be because really you need that brain maturation to develop the theory of mind, and that goes along with other, more advanced reasoning. Self-confidence, the idea that I could help somebody, that I have some kind of skill that could benefit someone else. And so it may be overinflated. One of the things I like about our textbook is that she really emphasizes that in middle childhood, they're a little bit more self-confident than maybe their skill set implies, but that's good. It causes them to try things, do good things, things like that. Popularity is associated with behaving in an altruistic, pro-social way. Other kids are drawn towards kids who are helpful. And I don't mean doormat, here, take all my food, it's okay, I'm not hungry. But more like the kinds of kids who are concerned for other people's perspective, and when possible, will give them assistance to help them to not have to suffer or be embarrassed or whatever. So how, as parents, can we encourage pro-social behavior? How, as adults, can we encourage this in the kids we come in contact with? Well, of course, as parents, beginning with a secure attachment, children who have a basic trust for the world are more likely to behave in pro-social ways. They feel like the world is a predictable place. Parents behaving in an altruistic way. If it's part of your family structure to volunteer or to donate or those kinds of things, it makes it more likely that kids sort of just internalize that, and it becomes the way that they react too. If you show concern for your neighbor and take them a dinner when they get injured at work or something, and check up on them to see how they're feeling, it really shows kids that, oh, we're supposed to care about the other humans in the world. Okay. Holding kids to high standards. I know that you want this for yourself, but how do you think it makes your peer feel that they don't have any? Maybe you could divide it up and let them have something like that. I'm holding them to high standards. I know you want it for yourself, but think about other people. Expecting honesty, right? Expecting kids to tell the truth. One of the things I raise my kids with is like, there will never be the kind of punishment you can imagine for any behavior you could ever do that will ever be worse than lying to me. Like, absolutely, there is nothing I will not tolerate more than lying. So my kids learned, suck it up and tell me what happened. And we can always work from there, right? So expecting honesty, expecting kids to be helpful. Don't put your plate down and then just go back to playing video games. Take your plate into the kitchen and put it in the dishwasher. Be helpful. Like little things. Think about other people, not just only yourself. And parents can really, and older adults can really help kids with that. And then something we talked about earlier, having responsibilities at home. Not just being, a prince or princess who has all their needs met, but actually being a contributing member of the group makes children feel more a part of the group, more self-confident, all the things that you really want. Providing other role models. I mean, from the time kids are really little, if we're going to have them watching TV, we could channel them towards pro-social ones. Like people oftentimes say Mr. Rogers, although as a child I found his music and stuff just really creepy. I did not like that show at all. But other shows like that, there's that Arthur show that kids watch today, and things on PBS. I mean, there's all sorts of shows available that involve pro-social acts rather than aggressive models and things like that. Put them in contact with other humans who are good role models, people who do good acts. Put them in contact, let them help them. So all of those kinds of things. All right. So altruism. Now, what about emotions? We haven't talked much about emotions since infancy. Children start to become scared of new things as they enter middle childhood. They start to become less concerned about themselves getting hurt or themselves getting lost or those kinds of concerns, which is great because this is the period of life when we start giving them more freedom. They can walk to the school by themselves if they live in a neighborhood with sidewalks. They can spend the night at their friend's house. They can, do things that are starting to expand out of the household. But then they start to get these weird fears, like preternatural fears, like maybe Dracula's real, or maybe there really are zombies. They start to have those kinds of, fearfulness about things that don't really even exist, but they become fixated on. And then, of course, school-related fears of failure, fears of being embarrassed at school. Some kids during this period of time will start to report nightmares about, I got to school and I forgot my homework, or I got to school and I forgot to put any clothes on. So I showed up at school and everybody's like, why are you naked? Oh, no, I'm naked. Like these fear, and some people say interpreting dreams that a fear that you've shown up someplace naked means that your basic fear is that you'll be unprepared. And so you see a lot of those kinds of I'm scared of things that happen at school, or that I'm not good enough, or things like that. Our last thought on psychosocial development is ERIKSON'S stages. So now, between 6th year of life and puberty, he says we're in the industry versus inferiority phase. So kids are really, focusing in on trying to do stuff, be industrious, make things, solve problems. They're like really willing to be busy. If they continually get feedback that what they do isn't good enough, they can develop the inferiority side, which means that they have a lack of confidence, that they feel like they aren't going to be efficacious in a scenario. They think my probability of failure is high. Whereas kids who solve this conflict on the side of industry, they're really interested in understanding how the world works, how things work. They develop the skill of being able to organize their time and their things, and so they are in a better position to address the next big conflict that'll happen in adolescence. So finishing with Erikson's psychosocial stages of development, that's what's going on. Our textbook talks a lot about the industry, so it's a really powerful part of childhood. All right, well, that concludes middle childhood. I will see you next in adolescence.